Welcome, everyone, to another awesome episode of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast. As usual, we have our co host Jesse, and we have our very special guest and returning guest to the show, Bobby Belmonte. And it's great to have you here again, Bobby.
Thanks for having me, boys.
Anytime, you're welcome here. Because, you give us all these pointers that we get to use and then pass it on to other people. We claim your information as our own all the time. Our main topic today is I'm very excited about it. We're talking about spring crappie fishing. And I don't mean that fishing in the spring is crappy. I'm talking about fishing for those crappie in the spring. It's fantastic. And that's the last joke I'll make on those lines. But
no, it isn't. Believe me.
Buckle your seatbelts, people. It's about to be a crappy episode. Before we get started into more that, Jesse has the interesting fishing fact for us. We're going to pass it on to him and see what's going to happen.
All right. So I thought that we would do something a little more not cold. And I'm thinking about summertime. It's April now. Things are melting. It's good. Maybe you started trout fishing already. You're thinking about panfish, like crappie, for instance. But I'm really thinking about summertime. I'm daydreaming about those days going out on the lake. And I think it's time for, Andrew's going to cringe, Loon Facts, Part 4. Now, I'm going to keep this one pretty short because it's not often, well, it is often this year that we have a good guest because last week was Jay Siemens. So, Bobby's got a tough act to follow, but he's up to it. I know he is. But we're going to keep this one short so that Bobby can, give us all the tips and I won't just ramble on about loons for like half an hour. But anyway, I'm going to see how many of these things you guys know. Now, do you know the interesting fact number 1 is loons waterproof themselves? Do you know what that's called, Andrew? Preening? Andrew knows all kind of weird stuff. Yes, it is. It's called preening. Now, they have to waterproof their feathers to protect their skin. You think of like Andrew, he has all that beard oil on his beard to protect his skin underneath, except that's not called preening, apparently. Now, it's pretty interesting. Humans can't do this. If Andrew could do this with his beard, I would be sickened. But basically, there's this gland at the base of their tail, like near their butt, and it basically secretes this gross oil that they coat their feathers with. Now, they do this a few different ways. Now, you may think, like, how do they do it? They don't have hands, obviously. Loons don't have hands. They have wings. So this is how they do it. You may see this on the lake and you may wonder, what the heck is that loon doing? This is what he's doing. He's preening. So you may see a loon doing weird things like this, sticking one leg in the air and paddling in circles. I don't know why, but they're trying to get some of that oil out. You may see them shaking their wings, their head, and their tail repeatedly. You may see them rubbing their head against its back and pulling at its feathers with its bill. I think I've seen that. You see them just kind of like, jerking their head around. You may see them flapping their wings hard out of the water. And it almost looks like they're trying to take off. They're just like flapping their wings furiously and they're not going anywhere. And you're like, wow, that thing needs to start working out because it's not moving at all. But it's literally just like trying to like cover itself with all the oil to protect its skin and its feathers. So maybe you've seen some of these weird things. I'm sure Bobby has out on the lake.
I was just going to say, it's funny that you say the one with the foot going in the circle, because I've seen that a few times and I've been like, oh, like, is it tangled in fishing line or something? And you don't think it's trying to spread its,
it's bum oil.
Bobby's trying to go over and put a preening loon out of its misery because he thinks it's damaged.
Yeah, it's true though. This article says, it says, sometimes preening loons can be mistaken for looking like they're in trouble.
No kidding.
Bobby Belmonte, fishing guide and loon savior.
I've had some bad run-ins with loons over the past like 2 years. My buddies would agree. Like, we go to this one lake in the fall and it's like the loons there aren't scared of you whatsoever. And, first you'll see them on the live scope, and you think, what the heck is this? And then it pops up 10 feet in front of you and they're just, they'll swim around the boat and squawk at you. But there's been a few times where they pop up like in between where your cast lands and, the boat, and then you're trying to retrieve them. And yeah, one time I was with Warren from Garmin and we were fishing a tournament out there, and this thing pops up like 10 feet from where my bait lands, and I start reeling in. Next thing you know, I get it in the foot or something, and it starts freaking out. I start freaking out. It got off. No animals were harmed, but you know,
Heck of a fight.
you're shifty little guys.
At least you weren't casting frogs at it. I've done that twice.
Yeah.
They go.
They are shifty little guys. That's why our main logo is a loon, because we're shifty guys.
There you go.
All right. The second point, an interesting fishing fact about loons is that loons are families that dine together, much like me when I grew up. We had to sit at the table and eat, or else we'd get in trouble. My mom would be like, you have to sit there till you finish your meal. One time my brother was like picky and he just like sat there for 2 or 3 hours. It's like, well, that meatloaf's not going to taste any better when it's cold, pal. Same with loons. So anyway, I digress. So they actually eat a lot of fish. It says a typical loon consumes about 2 pounds of fish every day. So that doesn't sound like a lot, but considering loons only weigh like 20, 25 pounds, like that's a fair bit of the percentage of their body weight. Now, over a 15-week breeding season, a loon family, a parent, like one of each parent and 2 chicks, can devour approximately half a ton of fish. That's about 1,000 pounds of fish. So imagine how skilled, I know we've talked about this before, but imagine how skilled these loons are at actually catching fish. So you see them diving down, just coming, grabbing fish constantly. Again, I have seen them on live scope too, go into the water, and they go deep. Like we talked about that in a previous loon fishing fact. But it's crazy how deep and how fast they are underwater. They're like literally like the fighter jets of the lake underneath the water. It's terrifying.
They look like dragons under there.
Yeah. A terrible day to be a minnow or a small fish.
Or crayfish or frog.
So this is the last and final point that I'll go into. And I thought possibly if Andrew wants to play, we could do a thing where Andrew does his best imitation of a loon call, because we have a few videos on Instagram that Andrew was doing a loon call in the lake and it got like 500,000 views, and everyone's like, wow, it doesn't even sound like a loon. It's like, come on, man. Like, it's a guy. What do you expect? So anyway, loons have a bunch of different calls. Obviously they're known for their haunting calls. And we talked about this in a previous loon fact that loons generally don't sleep for long periods of time. They only pretty much like nap throughout the day and at night. That's why oftentimes when you're camping in the middle of nowhere, it'll be like 3 a.m. and there's loons just like, making their crazy, eerie calls. And you're like, why don't you sleep? They don't. They're literally awake all the time. It's terrifying. Maybe that's why they have red eyes, because they're just tired.
Insomniacs.
That's not why, but that's a good idea. So they actually have a bunch of different calls and they each serve a distinctive purpose. So one of them is a wail. Not like a whale, like, on Finding Nemo, but a wail, a long haunting call used to communicate with other loons, often to reunite with a mate or a chick.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm not going to make Andrew do all these. We'll just do one at the end. One is a yodel. I'm sure you've heard that. A complex call given by males to establish and defend territory. Each male's yodel is unique. All right. Another one is a hoot. A soft, short call used among family members, especially between parents and chicks. I've heard Andrew's mom do this, so I agree with that. Last one is the tremolo, a wavering call, sometimes referred to as the laugh of the loon. We've all heard this. And what is it used for? It's used to cause alarm or signal distress. That's the one that annoys me the most. And seagulls do something similar. You'll be fishing and it's legit like they're laughing at you. Like, come on, man. Like, I'm fishing, not catching anything. Loon dives down, grabs a fish, comes up, has it, and then does that stupid laugh noise. Super annoying. But anyway, so Andrew, give us your best loon call.
Okay, I'm gonna do a was it tremolo or something like that? I'm gonna try that one.
Andrew's wife is sitting in the other room. She's gonna be like,
she's
what
upstairs. I got my landlord downstairs. They're gonna love this.
Mid.
Yeah.
That was okay. Anyway, the last thing that I'll leave you with is a very short fact that made me giggle like a child. Did you know that baby loons are called loonlets?
I did not know that.
That is so cute.
That is very cute.
Loonlet.
Anyway, that's all about loons today. You'll have to learn more about loons in the future on Loon Facts Part 5.
There was something I wanted to bring up the next time you mentioned loons. because I like my history stuff, Jesse. And I recently found out that I was reading, I wasn't buying the book, but I saw it on the shelf in Value Village. And it was all about the history of Algonquin Park. And as I flipped through, I saw a picture of this little log cabin in the park, ranger cabin. It was taken in 1897, and there's loon skins strapped to the outside on frames, like drying out, like curing.
Ew.
I'm like, like a loon pelt. And I've never heard of doing that like to a bird, where you actually get like the full, it's a whole loon skin, feathers and all.
Gross.
The purpose for it was they would line their boots as waterproof boot liners.
Because of the oil, the
Yeah.
butt oil.
Oh, the butt oil.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. So I thought of Jesse, and I figured I'd just save that in my back pocket until he brought up loons again in the podcast. So there's a little wacky history about loons as well.
That is cool.
I do not recommending. We have plastic nowadays. You can get waterproof boot liners without killing our glorious loons. Okay, so don't try that at home. But that was a good, interesting fishing fact, and also he got a little kind of bonus story time from Bobby too. So that was fantastic.
That one time I hooked a loon in the foot.
We'll have you back on purely just a loon central episode on all about how you can hook loons. All right, Bobby. Today we're talking about crappie fishing. We'll do loon fishing another time. Don't worry. Regarding our topic, I just wanted to mention as well. This is our episode sponsor is Lunkerhunt, and you may think of them as primarily for bass fishing, and they have some awesome gear. But we actually have, and we're going to a bit later, there's a lot of stuff that is actually fantastic for like pan fishing and stuff like that. So we will be talking about them in a bit as well, kind of featuring what stuff we're excited to use this spring from their stuff as well. But I wanted to get kind of a brief history again, or a recap. We've had Bobby on the episode before, but what kind of experience do you have in the fishing industry, and specifically even with crappie fishing? If you can just give us a quick rundown of why people should listen to you, because we're average, Bobby's not.
Sure. So I guess my background in the fishing industry is, since I was in high school, I've been, fishing in tournaments and helping out different companies in terms of selling their products. And, it was right after high school, I moved out to the Kawartha Lakes, and I basically have been fishing for a living unofficially since then. Fishing for as much as I could. And then, the past I'm going into my third year now of owning my own guiding service. And in terms of, species, crappie's one that I haven't done as long as I've, bass fished and fished for muskies and stuff. But it's one of those species that it's funny. There's certain species out there that almost seem like gems, I'm not a trout fisherman at all, but I know that brook trout are very dear to people's hearts in terms of, their spots for brook trout, or just catching brook trout, period, especially in our area, because they're not as common as, say, your steelhead and stuff that guys target more easily. I've never caught a brook trout. I've gone steelheading with friends and stuff, and brook trout's one of those ones that, you just don't see as often. And I feel like crappie's kind of like that in the panfish world. Is, everybody knows bluegills. A lot of people know jumbo perch, especially if you're on certain fisheries, jumbo perch, but crappies aren't everywhere. And crappies aren't everywhere in the Kawarthas. There's some lakes that don't have them. Or if they had them, a long time ago, they don't have them anymore. So it's one of those things that, I don't think a lot of people necessarily go out and target crappie. It's almost a smaller, almost a nichier thing so far. I think a lot of people run into them because they're actually a pretty accessible species if you're on the right body of water for them, one of the lakes that has them. But it's a cool species to kind of, that time of year too, when nothing's open in this area other than pike, it's a great species to start chasing. And once you get better at it, it's one of those species, I've spent a lot of time doing it now the past 5 or 6 years. And it's one of those things that I really enjoy. It's what I look forward to most when the ice is gone.
Mm-hmm. So the crappie, sorry, I was
No,
going
no,
to say with with crappie fishing in the spring, you mentioned accessibility. So, like, why are they more accessible in the spring than other times of the year? Would you say?
the spawn, the spawn, and that's probably another reason is with sunfish and stuff, you see them all season long in all different areas, right? You see them out deep sometimes, you see them in shallow bays when you're going around in the lily pads and stuff. But crappies, they'll come in and do their spawning stuff in the spring, and once they're done their spawn, they move out, and they're almost like ghosts on some lakes. Like in the spring, you can be on amazing crappie bites where you're catching them on every cast, and you go back there a week later when the spawn's done, and crickets, like just they're gone.
Mm-hmm.
But what's cool about it is they move into these shallow areas and stuff. And when you're saying, accessibility, um, there's shore spots that you can catch crappies at. And I mean, I don't think a lot of people do that. I think a lot of people do shore spots for bass, do shore spots for muskies, but it's pretty incredible if you were to go around to some of your bank spots, throw in a float setup, what you could catch.
That's awesome. So going more into detail than the springs that they're going to be accessible in the shallows. We're going to talk about kind of like the 3 stages of their spawn: the pre-spawn, mid-spawn, and post-spawn. Because the water temperature changes a lot. Would you say that water temperature is like the most important factor in locating them?
That time of year, locating them, not necessarily. Kind of knowing what they're doing is helpful, of course, but with crappie fishing, especially if you're on a smaller body of water, something like Rice Lake, which is a larger body of water, there will be lots of different spots that you can catch crappies in. One here, go a few kilometers down the lake, another one here, spawning bays where these crappies will move in, do their thing, and then move out. But on some lakes, there's like one spot where the whole population goes to. And when you're dealing with some of those smaller lakes, you kind of have to find the spot. You can go, around to areas that are the same structure and everything, look great, but they may not be there. And then you go into the right bay and everything's there. Now you do see that on smaller bodies of water over the big bodies. Like I said, like sturgeon, skugog, rice, there will be multiple areas. But again, same kind of thing on those lakes where they move into these areas, do their thing. It could be a small area, like it could be an area the size of, let's say, like 3 or 4 boats combined together on a certain part of the weed bed that they're doing their thing on. A few weeks pass, and it's almost trickier on those big lakes. I'm rambling a bit here, but those big lakes, they I feel like it's trickier because there's just a lot more weed on those lakes, and there's not necessarily the same depths like Skugog, where like the deepest spot on Skugog is like 25 maybe feet.
And that accounts for
Um,
2% of the lake.
yeah, well, and like you think, right? Like Skugog, okay, everything's like there's areas that have sand and stuff out there, but there's so much just mud, weed.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, where's the spawning bay? The whole Port Perry side is a spawning bay, honestly. Like the whole thing is shallow weed, right? So those lakes are almost trickier to find those little areas, and those areas move around every year. This part of the weed is healthiest this year. That's where they're setting up. Those smaller lakes, like I said, once you find an area that, okay, this is where the crappies go spawn, you go there every year and they're there the same time. And in terms of, finding them, are they right up on the bank? Are they, 50 yards off the bank? Or are they right out in the middle of, the channel or whatever the case may be, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, though the areas are small and they can change, but every lake is different. Every lake has its own, way that things work.
Absolutely.
I thought there was going to be just like some epic cheat code. It's like this exact spot in every lake will be full of crappie.
Yeah.
No, it's
No,
not easy. I think that's why a lot of people get frustrated. And I'll tell you, like, we've gone crappie fishing a bunch. We're not by far experts at all, but people ask us all the time on Instagram, every spring, do a crappie episode. do crappie stuff, because people want to know how to catch these fish. And it's the fact that like all the stuff you mentioned, sometimes like we'll go out and be like, yeah, Andrew's buddy said they were crushing crappie here last week. We'll go to the same spot and nothing. It's like,
Right.
what? This guy's lying to us? It's like, no, man, like he slammed them there. So I think that is one thing that might frustrate a lot of people, because they are tricky fish to locate. Not necessarily to catch most of the time, but to locate can be tricky. Yeah.
So is there a certain we'll go into kind of locations to look for kind of structure and whatnot next, but is there a temperature range that you'd say this is kind of prime time when they're going to be most accessible? Because there's got to be a certain point where the water temperature is warm enough, they're done their spawn, and you're just not going to see them again.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, when we lose the ice here, usually the first time out, the water will be in the 40s typically. At that point, it's funny. I feel like I talked about the same thing when we were doing the bass episode, where I was talking about the two different kinds of lakes. You know, the shallower, grassier lakes, and then the lakes that are more Canadian Shield, deeper basin. You know,
Mm-hmm.
those kind of lakes. And in both of those scenarios, the water temperature is usually different. You know, like lakes like Scugog and Rice, the water temperature will rise quicker than, say, your sturgeon, your balsam, your pigeon, your north end of pigeon, right? And your deeper water is going to take longer to warm. So crappies can be spawning in different lakes at different times.
Mm-hmm.
So like usually the first outings for me are Rice Lake. That's where I go to because it's closest lake to my house. It's one of the ones that I've done the most crappie fishing on. I know, lots of water for them that I can move around and check and be like, okay, they're here, not here, right? When I go out there, sometimes they're already on the spawn, funny enough, and the water will be in the 40s. Maybe because they know that once that water starts to rise, it's going to rise quick on Rice Lake. Rice is known for its water, the temperature spikes. You can go out one day and it can be in the 70s, and then you go out the next day, it's in the 60s. It fluctuates a lot depending on the wind and whatever weather you get. But then a lake, say like Balsam, for example, that has a lot of deeper water, right? I won't see the crappies spawn out there until that water hits 50 degrees. And 50 degrees typically is what you want for when a lot of stuff starts happening in the lake when the water hits 50 degrees. So a lot of the plant growth and whatnot is what I mostly mean, and that ends up triggering the crappies too. On the deeper bodies of water, it is almost like clockwork. You can go off the water temp. You can go out there and be like, oh, it's 47. They're going to be. You go to the area that you've found over the years, and this is a zone that we find them in. Oh, they're not up shallow. We found them out in 12 feet of water right out front of the bay, waiting to go in. Right, like it's one of those situations. But like I said, with the grassier lakes, you can go as soon as the ice is out here. Say you go out and there's 40, let's say 43, 44 degree water. And you'd think, oh, on Balsam, you'd be like, oh, maybe they're going to be in that staging zone. Nope, they're up in 4 feet in any weed growth they can find, which is maybe a little bit warmer if they're around some weeds, and they're spawning already, which is actually what happened last year to me, which is why I bring it up. It's interesting. It's one of those things that they're not as predictable as, say, bass.
That's a very specific. I want this temperature. That's spawn time. Like,
yeah. It's a perfect kind of example is when the smallmouth and the largemouth spawn, especially the largemouth.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've all done it when we're fishing pike and stuff, and you end up hooking into largemouth because they're in the same area as up spawning, right? And the crappies, it's so random. I think I talked about it on the last podcast I was on with you guys, where I said that I had a trip. It was one of my favorite trips, and it was super late in the season. And I didn't know if we were going to get on the crappies or not, because I thought they were going to be pushed out, but they were still like up spawning. And that day, on that lake, it was the water temperatures just didn't rise up. So they were still spawning then, but that was like late May, like weird late, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was like us last year. Remember, Andrew?
Yeah.
We were out on late May, and we got onto like a smack fest of them, and Andrew caught his PB.
Mm-hmm.
So like, yeah, I guess it really depends on the year. That's the problem. It's not predictable. Dang it.
That's it, right?
Why isn't fishing easier?
Yeah, and yeah, different on every body of water and different every season, it seems like.
Do you think that if like you're saying, last thing on temperature wise is sudden temperature swings, right? If it goes, let's say it cools right back down, a big cold front moves in, will that kind of hold off the spawn a bit longer? Like let's say they're in the spawning grounds about to spawn, but let's say it goes really, really hot or really cold. Will that make them move off of the spawning grounds again, or will they finish their spawn?
No, they'll push off. They're the kind of species that they're not going to deploy.
More elusive.
Yeah. They're not
Dang
going to
it.
deploy their eggs all at once. You know, they're going to do it in waves. So you'll get a crappie. Let's say we're talking about one crappie, right? This crappie will come into the spawning ground. She's waiting to go up and do her thing, you know. Then she gets a warm day and she's like, I'm going to go up and do it. She goes up and does it. And then a cold front hits that night. But she's, you know, only laid, you know, a few, whatever, 50% of her eggs or whatever, right? She may roll off and wait, you know, because they all have to push up together when they spawn. The females, you'll see them when they're spawning. They're chasing each other around, you know, shallow in the lily pads and stuff. And they're just waiting for that female to dump her eggs, and they all just, you know, hop on it.
We have to keep this podcast PG-13.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. It's one of those, yeah.
It's just like the unnecessary bleeping, you know, those like those shows.
Conversation. You know what I mean?
It's like, well, son, the crappie goes shallow, and all the males just. Just kidding.
Yeah.
We've seen worse on the Magic School Bus. Don't worry about it.
I was going to just say, there's a Magic School Bus episode where they do salmon.
Yeah. They all get turned into eggs and they get melted on.
So gross. That's a classic TV. I tell you though, TV shows, on a slight tangent, they've changed a lot. The kid shows now are terrible. They're stupid. So I was showing my nephew, he's like 10, 11, something like that. And we were legit watching Magic School Bus because it's on like some streaming service. And he's like, this is the best show ever. I was like, yeah, it's the best. And I found the fishing one, the best. Yeah, it's pretty good. Anyway, watch Magic School Bus. We don't tell you guys to do much, but do that.
Yeah, if you haven't seen that episode, it's worth a YouTube.
Or the one
here's a question,
the one to get turned into clams, also terrifying.
If Bobby had to be a character on Magic School Bus, who would he be? Definitely
Carlos.
No.
Ralphie. I always like the little chameleon dude.
Okay, you can be Liz.
Yep. I want to be Liz. Come on. Jesse's Miss Frizzle.
Yes, I am. That's Mr. Frizzle.
Always leading the lesson. All right, great tangent. I actually really liked that, but we're going to move on. So talking about locating the crappie now. So more about structure and whatnot. So they, in early spring, like they are in deeper water. They're off the spawning flats. They're close to drop-offs, channels. Kind of, like you said, staging to get into these bays, right?
Yeah.
With those cold temperatures, would you recommend, like, what kind of presentations do you like to recommend for kind of that pre-spawn? Yeah, just kind of staging in. What do you recommend to use?
So a lot of the times when they're in that pre-spawn is when I'm in that searching mode too. I'm trying to dial in what areas they're using on a given year. I love throwing, there's two baits that I throw a lot. One's a small jerk bait. Mm-hmm. I use a few different kinds, but we're talking like a 70, 80 millimeter, you know, small X wraps. There's a mega bass one that I use, which I filmed a video that I'm going to talk about it soon here. It's the X70 by Mega Bass, and
I've been looking at that in the store. I want to pick that up.
It's it's a super nice bait, man. Yeah, and they have the same action as a Vision 110, but it's a slow float model too, which is great for cold water because basically you just throw it into, you know, twitch it down into that zone that, you know, it dives down to. I think it goes only about 4 feet or so, 4 or 5 feet when you're fully retrieving it. And then kill it, and it just, you know, comes up like that. And if you're actually on the school of crappies and you kill it right in the school of crappies and it starts floating up, like I've dummied them on that bait before. It's it's awesome. But yeah, small jerk baits. Another one, micro crankbaits. Another thing that not a lot of people use. Again, I do like my Japanese ones, the mega bass ones that I've used in the past. The little griffins, they're called. Those ones are cool. They're like a little fat crankbait, and you can buy them that go different depths, but same kind of thing. They are slow float, so you kill them. Certain models, of course, you can buy the slow float and I think non-slow float, normal suspending and stuff. But the slow float models, you kill them and they just kind of slowly start to come up, and that's awesome for crappies. So those two are usually what I'm using pre-spawn, because I'm trying to locate the areas. And once you find an area that they're in pre-spawn mode, they're usually kind of all balled up together in a lot of the cases. Now on Rice Lake and Scugog, it's a little bit different because you're dealing with a lot shallower crappies. But on lakes like Sturgeon and lakes like that have deeper water, they'll all be in a big ball kind of, or big pod swimming around on the break or in the shallow, like before they get right up into the flat, say 6-7 feet. And it's a lot of fun to use those baits when they're like that. But some days, if they're not aggressive, like if you get cold front days that come in and the water temperature drops, sometimes you have to pick up a float, find out what depth you got to get that bait at. Maybe you got to really downsize too. Like that, there's some days, I'm sure you've seen it when you've been ice fishing before, where like big fish will bite things that are so small. And with crappies, it's the same kind of deal. When they're lethargic in the spring, put on a super small. My buddy Griffin is great at this because he will just like mess with weird stuff when we're fishing. So he'll just start ripping his plastics apart and threading little chunks of whatever on his hook. Next thing you know, he's catching more fish than me, right? Like it's and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Most of the time it doesn't. But and he knows that.
Yep.
But it's okay because he's ripping your plastic baits apart, so it doesn't matter.
I'm surprised you're talking about like active like search baiting, but you said like stopping it, letting it rise. Like how long? Just for our audio listeners who can't watch you fish right now, which I'm sure we'd all love to, but like what kind of rhythm would you like, reeling in nice and slow, and then you'd pause for what, like a count of 2-3 seconds, and then reel in for another like 3-4 seconds? Like what kind of speed are you going at here?
Yeah, so like depending on if you're using a slow float or like an X wrap, which suspends, you're gonna reel up so your line's tight on the jerk bait, and you're gonna either crank it down a few cranks so that it goes down a few feet, or you can just start twitching right off the bat, whatever you want to do. But let's say you crank it down a few feet and then just start twitching, and as you're twitching, after cranking it down a few feet, it'll keep going down into the zone, right? And then kind of imagine that halfway through your cast, you want it to be all the way down. So, I mean, if you get a full cast with it, like you have enough line on your reel and you get a nice clean cast with the bait, it'll go down to its desired depth, depending on what bait you're using, right? Like the little X70s, they'll go down about 5 feet, that time of year, usually that's all you need. I mean, there are circumstances where maybe you got to go deeper, and then maybe the jerk bait isn't what you should be throwing, right? But most of the time, that time of year, that's what I catch them on, is a little jerk bait. I was playing with the crankbaits last year too, but the jerk bait is my bread and butter that time of year,
Yeah.
And that little X70 is just the one that I've grown to like a lot because of its little slow float action. You can catch them on that right through. They will eat that too, like in the spawn, because you can do it in the shallows. Twitch down a little bit, let it come up, right? And fish it in like 2 feet, 3 feet of water, shallow stuff. Slow float action helps for that. The one other thing I will say for anybody listening who wants to try this is when you're using a small jerk bait like that, you do want to run at least a different leader line instead of, your normal jerk bait setup that you might be using. Say you're, my jerk bait, I have 10-pound fluoro for my leader. That's when I'm bass fishing or using it for walleye, right? When I'm crappie fishing, I'm using 5-pound for my jerkbait, crankbait leader. Now I still use the same rod I'm using for jerkbaits because, I have it's a nice jerkbait rod. So it does help me work the small baits, but, use that light spinning rod you have, or whatever the lightest rod is. Maybe you have a light or an ultralight crappie rod, and you can actually use that instead. And again, use whatever line you have on it for braid, but the leader is what you should downsize, just so that the fluoro, if you have a 10-pound fluoro on one of these little jerk baits, you're not going to get everything out of that little bait that you want to get out of it. You may overwork the bait with that heavier line. So that's kind of where it comes down to thinking about, okay, if I'm downsizing the bait, I got to downsize some more of my tackle in order for it to perform right.
That's awesome. Going into kind of the mid spawn then, so mid to late spring, let's say they're going into those shallower bays for that spawn. What is some of the structure that you're looking for? And then again, what are kind of your go-to techniques for fishing for them there, like baits and whatnot?
Yeah, so it's funny because a lot of the times when you look up like information of crappies on Google and stuff, they're going to tell you like, look for stumps, pencil reeds, that kind of stuff, fallen timber, all sorts of stuff. I've never caught them off that stuff in the Kawartha Lakes. What I look for are shallow bays. Shallow, I'm talking that where the bank is like goes right into the mud, a foot of water, 6 inches of water on the bank. And it's a gradual, shallow bay with mud bottom. Mud is key. You're not going to find them in these bays that have sand bottom on the bank. It's all got to be mud.
Is the mud bottom warmer, you think?
Yeah.
Is that
and it's
probably a determining factor?
Yeah, warmer, and it's going to support weed growth quicker than if it was growing on sand or elsewhere. You're going to find a lot of dead weed up in that area. Sometimes I've had a couple seasons where the weed hasn't grown in, and because the dead weed does hold some more warmth than open nothingness, right? They'll go relate to the dead weed until some more stuff starts growing in, and they can, kind of push onto the nice stuff. So yeah, mud bottom is the main thing. I'm looking at my map and I'm looking for areas. They will say mud bottom on a lot of, if you're looking at Navionics and stuff. So I'm looking for mud bottom bays that go into, 3 feet or less at the bank, let's say shallow bays. And then you start getting into, okay, what bays are best, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe the bay that has that mud and that shallowness, but has 10 feet of water within, 500 yards or something, maybe that's a bay I should check out, because there's a little, there's some deeper water there where they can move, right? So, but the main thing is mud bottom. Yeah, mud bottom, shallow bays, and then just weed growth. I'm not looking for wood or anything. I'm just looking for weed growth, and if there's lots of weed growth, then I'm looking for healthy weed.
At that point, then too, are you sight fishing now for these fish? Like is that shallow? Like you can, I'm sure you can sight fish for all, right?
When it's spawn time and they're up in that 3, 2, sometimes a foot of water, yeah, you can sight fish them. Last year, I'm going to tell a quick little story here. So last year, I go out first day, and I go in morning, and I go to the bay that I was catching the crappies in good last year on opener. And I'm going through the bay, and it's all dead weed, but I'm fishing it anyways because this is the first spot that I've been to, and it was good last year. So try it out, right? Nothing, the odd little largemouth or something. So then I start working my way back towards the launch, hitting bays and stuff on the way that I've seen them. And I get into this one small bay, not a big bay, and I'm trolling motoring in. And it's at this point, we're getting into the early afternoon, so it's sunny out. I can see, all the weed growth. And I got the trolling motor on high because I'm covering water, trying to find where they are. And I'm just looking down, and all of a sudden, oh, there's one. Oh, there's another one. Oh, there's another one. All of a sudden, they're all around my boat. And it's like, oh, great, set a waypoint, and then looped around and just started casting in that area, and I didn't have to move for the rest of the day.
And
And
do
then
you
I
just
had,
use like floats with micro jigs at that point, or like
yeah,
just a
so
still approach basically?
yeah, so with when they're on the spawn, if you're just fan casting around for them, I will have the float on. And, I'll try to set it at the appropriate depth where, it's maybe a foot off the bottom. You don't want your bait to go onto the bottom with crappies because they eat upwards. Their mouth is kind of like cupped like this. So they're not going to go down and like eat your bait off the bottom the way a smallmouth does. Um, they're gonna, they're always going to eat up. So it's good to keep the bait a little bit higher. You can be too low, but you really can't be too high. They'll come up and hit the bobber sometimes.
We've
Um,
had that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, I try to keep it, maybe a foot off the bottom, let's say, depending on where I'm fishing, and I'll fan cast with the float. Now, if I'm on a body of water where I have clear water, I can see really well, sometimes I'll just take my float right off and I'll just pitch just my little plastic on my little tube head around and watch them eat it. Sometimes we'll power pull down in a shallow area and sit there looking at a 14-incher, trying to brush his nose with it. And he won't hit it, and then you finally just touch him on the nose and whoop, he just eats the bait. Like it's super cool. That's the most fun time of the year, you know? And one of the cool things too with them is like, you'll see one and you'll go, oh yeah, it looks like a good one, right? And you'll hook it and it turns on its side, and you go, oh, like that's when you really see their size, right? They don't look big from above, but when they turn on the side and you see that dinner plate, that's when it gets exciting. And
That's
it,
how I caught my 14-inch one.
yeah,
We were fishing with Brian, Halliburton Fishing Guide, and we just happened to come across one crappie. We weren't even going for a crappie guided trip with him. Like, he doesn't do that, but he started hitting him. He's like, all right, well, let's just let's have some
yeah,
fun for like 20 minutes. And
he's
yeah,
got
I sight
giants up
fished
there
that
too.
14. It was so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and did you think it was 14 when you saw it?
No.
No.
Right?
I could see him like, man, like from the top down, they all look narrow, right? They're very narrow
Yeah.
fish. But
Mhm.
looking at the top down on that one, I'm like, he's thick. Like, comparatively, he's thick.
Oh, he had a bit
So
of pudge, eh?
yeah. So I'm like,
Yeah.
all right,
Okay.
like when his body is twice as wide as everyone else's, I'm like, okay, but they're so well camouflaged. It was surprised we'd be right on top of them and they'd be 6 feet away before I'd see the thing. So
Yeah.
that was fun. It is very fun to sight fish anything, but then just like super finesse, drop it down so you don't spook them, and you gotta like just tease it right in front of their face, and then they just like, you gotta watch to make sure do they get just the tail of the bait or that hook in their mouth, and
Right.
just like pop them really lightly, and
And I
it's
mean,
wicked.
you're this is not a species where the fight is anything special, because
No,
realistically you're hooking it and just craning it into the boat, right?
yeah,
um but that is the fun part, is you literally are getting so finessey with it, to the point where sometimes you have to give them the old mustache brush, and then that's when they decide to eat, and they can be stubborn when they're up in those real shallow water. um but yeah, the in terms of baits, it is that's when you get finessey. That's when you bring out the little plastics, experiment with different stuff. I actually, so I've put some stuff aside here in case I started to get chatty with
that's actually
tackle.
perfect because I was gonna ask like, what are some like between live bait, artificial? Like, do you fish one primarily? Do you normally fish artificial baits over live bait?
Yeah, that's just me.
Yeah.
Some people do the live bait too. Some days I stand there and I go, I wonder if we would have gotten better with
Mm-hmm.
live bait, because crappies and panfish in general are one of those species where live bait can make a big difference. But just from how I fish, I'm always doing it artificial. So typically a few of the things that I use, like crappie tubes, are kind of your traditional little bait. A tiny little tube
Mm-hmm.
with the tube head that's just been threaded on, just like a bass tube.
It's like an
But
inch and a quarter long.
yep, small, very small. I found that nowadays you do have to get a little bit more realistic with them. So things like little minnow baits and
Mm.
stuff, shad profile, because 9 times out of 10, these crappies are eating one of two things. They're either eating tiny little fry minnows, whether it's bluegill fry or bass fry or crappie fry or whatever, small little minnows that are in the same areas, or bugs. That's pretty much it. So if you mimic one of those, you're pretty golden. One of the things that I want to share with you guys that I'm going to try this year. You guys know I like my Japanese tackle.
Yes.
And I'm sure you guys have all seen the whole dice craze going
Yes.
on. So this long winter,
what do you mean dice craze?
Yeah, there you go. Right? I've been making my own little. This one's got just a few strands on it.
I am interested.
My own little.
I've sneezed things out bigger than that.
Be saving them, man.
I picked something out of my teeth just a few minutes ago that was bigger than that.
Yeah, tiny little micro crappie dice. You know,
Cool.
We're gonna see if those work for crappies and see what happens. Because I mean, if you thread in some strands and make them kind of look like a little stonefly or a mayfly or something, like why not, right?
Mm-hmm. You heard it here first. So if this goes popular in Japan next year, you know they stole it from Bobby.
Micro dice.
Yeah,
Crappie dice.
I've used them for smallmouth. They definitely work for smallmouth.
Yeah.
So
call them loaded dice. Ooh. Is there any like colors and stuff you prefer to use? Again, I know a lot of times color can be a preference, but is there something that you feel is beneficial for color selection?
9 times out of 10 I'll go natural. I just keep it with like a green pumpkin or any of the little minnow patterns that you can find. I don't really, I mix it up. I have a whole bunch of different colors that some days I'll just experiment. You know, say I have multiple people on the boat, you know, this guy will throw this color, this guy will throw this color, and we'll just kind of see, right? But I will say this, and this might be giving up a little bit of juice, but that's okay. I'm planning on making a whole bunch of videos myself this year, so I'm going to give up a whole bunch of juice anyways. So this will end up This color is called Electric Chicken, and I can tell you last year, like 3 or 4 different times, I was fishing crappies in an area where there was like multiple boats, and I had the boat come over and be like, "What are you guys using that we're not?" Right? And they're throwing float setups too, and I showed them the Electric Chicken. And then they went over and they had something in their boat that was Electric Chicken. Next thing you know, they're catching too. Like,
and that's like hot pink and bright green. Like,
yeah. Literally, it's like
I've done good on that color too.
Yeah. And it's not a bass thing. I don't use this color for bass. Like, you would never see me throw this any other time. Crappies like it though, and it's one of those things where like they weren't eating green pumpkin or black or any minnow patterns, and it's like, okay, well, let's just try something weird.
Do you have success with white? Like, is that like with white? Is that a natural enough color you find, or is that normally too bright for, or can be too bright?
My rule with white is I'll only pick up white when there's overcast. That's just kind of maybe it's just what I've learned over the years, confidence wise, and that goes across the board. That goes for all species. I don't like throwing white when there's sunshine. I like, if there's those dark skies, I like throwing the white bait. I find it pops, really stands out in those conditions. Maybe I'll use something with a bit of a white belly or something, and that's whatever. But the whites, I use that Electric Chicken more than white. Yeah. I do have some white baits, but I've never really cracked them on white. It's always either green pumpkin, 9 times out of 10, green pumpkin. And then you get a weird day and Electric Chicken comes in. So
that's the dance that Jesse does sometimes when he catches a new PB. He does the Electric Chicken.
It's true.
But that's usually a bit different than just the color of the bait.
It's funny though, when you look at tackle and like say you look at a crappie lure, right? Or a plastic, panfish plastic, one of the colors that always sells out first is Electric Chicken.
That's interesting.
So, yeah.
Now, speaking of different baits and whatnot, I'm going to pass it over to Jesse again, because we're going to talk about some awesome stuff from our episode sponsor, Lunkerhunt. And they have like I was saying, they have a good selection of crappie baits, panfish baits, and stuff like that.
That was it. That was the transition.
That was the transition. I was hoping you
just
kind of jump
stopped
in
abruptly.
Okay. Here, I'll blend it better. So, speaking of little baits and crappie baits, the baits are great. But speaking about them as a kind of a crappy guy, and we're going to pass it over to Jesse to talk about these little baits.
So actually, Lunkerhunt reached out to us a few months ago, and the Lunkerhunt guy was like, "Dude, we want to send you some baits. You can check them out." And I was like, ironically, we use Lunkerhunt baits all the time. Actually, some of Andrew's craziest baits that he uses are Lunkerhunt baits. So we've been buying their stuff for a long time. Here's the actual deal. We do get a lot of sponsorship opportunities, and we turn down literally 80% of them because they're not fishing related, or it's not a brand that we actually use. So this one, I was happy because I was like, as long as you can give us a really good giveaway to give away for this podcast episode, we're more than happy to talk about the stuff because we use it anyway. I'll tell you a quick story because this kind of pertains to panfish. I picked this up at Canadian Tire. These are the Lunkerhunt, I forget what they call them, the river worms. They're just like a trout worm, but they've got kind of like a curl to them. Mm-hmm. It looks like naturally like a worm just curling and withering down the river. This was the first pink worm that I ever bought. And I caught my first steelhead on a pink worm on this worm. And I haven't used them in a while. I saw these at Canadian Tire the other day and I had to pick it up. And I was like, oh, the bubblegum worm. They just make cool stuff. So anyway, some of the cool baits that me and Andrew are going to show you are baits that are very cool looking. They're great panfish baits. They could also be really good finesse baits for other species too. First one, I think the one that me and Andrew are the most excited to use. I've heard a lot of really good things about these. These are the bento baits minnow. Mm-hmm. It's just like a super small minnow. These actually won Best of Show at iCast one year, a few years ago. They're ultra realistic. This is a very small one. It's like a 2.5 inch bait. They actually mold these around a piece of mylar, which is like a fly tying material. But if you look at the bait, it's kind of translucent. Mm-hmm. You can literally see that mylar through, and it kind of has that, minnows always have that kind of like purpley bluish hue to them when you look at the
iridescence
size.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what it looks like. And these are very natural. It has a very thin, slender split tail on the back that just it's moving around like crazy.
It is a 3-inch bait. Like it does say it's a 3-inch bait, but when you look at it, it is very finessey. It's a small bait. I got that.
They make these in larger sizes too.
It's like a nice perch fry there too. Like they have some wicked colors on these.
Yeah, I'm excited to throw this. I was actually thinking one cool way you could put this on a jig head. But I was thinking one way is you could get just like a hover rig and just like rig it inside of the bait.
Sure.
And then just like hang it under a float. It would look super, super natural. No jig head or nothing.
I fished with a guy who was sponsored by Lunkerhunt. I think he still is, Brandon Perry. This was a long time ago, like 10 years ago. And we were on Rice Lake for walleyes, and he was using that bait when it first came out. So maybe not 10 years, but whenever it first came out. And he was cracking them on it on a heavy ball head, just dunking it in the weed and kind of popping it along like a air jig. Mm-hmm. And he did super well with those.
Yeah. It's just one of those baits that it looks ultra realistic. Like I know like sometimes we think, oh, it doesn't actually matter. But sometimes like Bobby was saying, sometimes those crappie, they're super picky. Like me and Andrew last year, we were trying to catch this one crappie. And I was trying to get it to bite, and we were trying all different colors. We'd like try to catch it 4 or 5 times. And then I'd try a different color of tube, and it would come close and back away. And then we were just going through everything. And it got to the point where finally Andrew picked the right color and the fish just came up and ate it.
Black,
so at that point I was
green.
Like, it had to have been the color. Maybe we annoyed it to death, but it had to have been the color. But sometimes I feel like just being super realistic is the deal.
Yeah, and that's not too big either. Like
no, it's not even that big. No, like I've caught crappie flipping for bass on docks. I literally ripped a crappie's face off one time. Like literally, I pitched a Texas rig underneath a dock on Pigeon, felt a tap. I set the hook because it was like under this gnarly dock, and this crappie just flew through the air, and it was like 7 inches long, and I was like, my bad. Just like, well, I guess I should keep this thing and eat it because it's not going to be able to forage naturally after this.
No more lip anymore.
Jesse did a classic lip ripper.
Yeah, 50-pound braid. So what's the other bait that you're looking at, Andrew?
I'm really excited for these. These are the Hive Micro Wiggler, and they have the larger size. They have the Finesse Wiggler. These are, I think they're 3 inches as well, 2.5 inches on these. but they're made of that really stretchy plastic. This is the micro wiggler. It's only 1.5 inches long. Like, it's microscopic. But you pair that with a small, like tiny little tungsten jig head. But the great thing is it's made of like that super stretchy plastic, which if you ever fished really small, like plastics like this, you'll realize how brittle and how easy to start breaking. Like your tail, which is giving all that enticement, will be gone after the first fish. But with this type of plastic, it just stretches like mad. So it's going to stay on there and hold that hook and not get nipped off on the first 1 or 2 fish. So I really like that because you're actually getting a good bang for your buck with it.
And
that would be a good example of a downsizing bait too, just from seeing it.
Yeah, it's only 1.25 inches long.
Yeah.
It also actually comes in a slightly bigger size. This is
Nice.
more of, it's still not too big, but you could also do a lot of things for this with bass fishing, even drop shot, Ned rig. It just has a really buggy look to it. It's crazy.
You can hold it still.
Andrew's got both green pumpkin ones.
Yeah, we had a couple of colors each. You've been saying green pumpkin, so I'm like, okay, I'm going to look like a smart guy and just keep holding up green pumpkin lures.
I thought they sent you all the green pumpkin stuff and sent Jesse pink and...
I got the little pinky.
Yeah.
But that's the size of baits, though, that even if I wasn't fishing for crappie per se and I was just fishing for panfish, if I took my nephew out and I put this on a little ball head jig and I was like, all right, let's go and find a bay just full of sunfish, you could clean up on this. And as Andrew said, if you're fishing worms or whatever, they're pecking that off your hook all day long. So if you get something like this and you imagine you super glue that to the jig head, that is probably going to last you hours or the whole day. Guaranteed. So that's cool. I love seeing all these new companies using the new stretchy plastics now. And again, this is called UDSP, which means ultra durable soft plastic. It's like the best acronym ever, but it is super durable.
Straight and to the point.
Yeah. There's another cool one here that I want to, that's the bag right there. These are pretty cool. These are called the flicker worm.
Yeah. I just picked that up too.
Yeah. So it's literally just like a super small finesse worm.
Nice.
The actual body of the worm's probably 1 inch long, and then the tail's probably just slightly less than an inch, but it's just like a little thin, wispy tail on the end.
Mm-hmm.
And it has such a quivering action in the water. Imagine that just like on a little jig head, just twitching it around.
And that's your more traditional plastic it's made of, but I think for the action of it would have to be, because it just has, once you hold this thing, like the tail is very limp, right? When you're holding it out of the water. So in the water, it just, any movement is immediately like translated to the tail, which is really cool. Another thing I'd have to add too is sometimes people are like, well, why would you buy something that's not made of the stretchy material? Well, the stretchy material that all brands use, and Lunkerhunt too, it floats. It's high float. So sometimes that is not what you want. You don't want your bait, depending on the technique, if you're drop shotting, if you're doing this or that, sometimes you want your bait to stand up. Sometimes you don't. So if you don't need that, you can check out the flicker worm too. It has, it's not made of that stretchy material. I would stretch it right now, but I'd break it. So I don't want to do that. So I'm going to use this. You know what's funny? All these baits, definitely panfish for sure. But as a trout guy growing up, I'm looking at all these baits and I'm like, dude, I could float fish that. That would be sick. Dude, on those days when it's like super clear water, this little like 1.5 inch little hive thing on a little tiny little hook, just on like maybe 4-pound fluorocarbon, floating that through a pool, guarantee that'll catch fish. Guaranteed. For me, like I look at these things and even beyond that, I think bass, like super finessey, really cold fall day, like bass, or like one of those bad cold fronts after a storm during the summer, and you're not hitting anything. And I start, drop shotting these little things around, I'm cleaning up with it. I guarantee it. Like they can't pass this up. So if you had to rate these baits, Bobby, by choice, and your choice would be the bento, the minnow there, or the hive wiggler, or that flicker worm, which one would be your first choice?
The bento. Yeah. Just it is the most realistic looking to me, and I'm big on realism. So plus I've seen that thing work before.
Oh so. Yeah. Secondhand confidence is key. This I'm not joking. This is going to be tied onto my crappie rod the first trip of the year. That looks sick. And again, there's so many ways that you can rig this. You could put this on a ball head. You could drop shot this. You could suspend this under a float. So many ways. Pretty cool. I've also seen guys literally just like kind of hook them through with a very small head and just cast them out and just kind of like dart them back in. Kind of has a cool little
One of
darting
the
action.
things that I see a lot of people do with the crappy plastics is they do use the ball head under the float or just straight ball head. A little tip or recommendation I would give to you is if you ever find those little tube head floats, like I got one right here that I will hold up to the camera, but it's basically the same kind of hook that you would use for like a tube jig, but it's like a panfish sized one. Why I like these so much better is when you take a plastic and just thread it on, don't use it like a tube head. Like you can, of course, you can put it inside a tube, but take like a minnow bait or take that bento minnow or any of those baits really, and just thread it on the hook and push it right up over the head of this little thing. And the reason why I like using these a lot more is when you're using a ball head, that ball head, the weight of the ball head really controls the fall. But when you use one of these suckers, it just spreads
Almost
out
a
the
hover
weight.
rig.
Almost, yes.
Yeah.
It gives it more of a almost diagonal kind of slower drop, because you have the plastic that's taking up most of it. Like, well, you saw it when I was holding up that little electric chicken thing. Here, see, I've pushed it right up. So there's only a tiny bit of the jig head exposed.
Mm-hmm.
And when it falls, the plastic really kind of takes control of the fall over the jig head, which just looks a little bit more realistic than the ball head kind of going like this, and the ball head controlling the fall more. It's nice to get the most out of the plastic when you're using it.
That's the juice right there. Bobby's super cool juice jig head pushed onto the plastic trick.
Mm-hmm.
I like it.
We brought Bobby on the podcast and we juiced him for all his information.
I gotta give a shout out. I gotta give a shout out to my friend Chris Huskelson, who works at Tackle Bros. Some of you listening may know him. He has taught me so much about crappie fishing. If anybody follows him, you've seen the crappies that he catches too. He catches monster crappies, and that's a tip from him that I learned.
He's gonna be mad.
He's
going to be there with his mustache.
One other thing I wanted to mention just about Lunkerhunt again is they have their tungsten jig heads, which are more and more common these days, right? Like everyone knows about tungsten jig heads, like micro tungstens. But one thing I do like about it is their weight placement on the hook. And the big deal with that is I've had some in the past where essentially it is kind of like a ball head where they put it on, and I was missing so many fish because the hook, the gap in the hook, is blocked by half the weight or more than half the weight. Have the weight on like the top side of it. And I found like I was just missing so many fish because it's just eliminating the possibility to get the hook point into the mouth. As you pull it forward, it pops their lips open and the hook just flies out. But with these, pretty much the entirety of that weight is actually on the bottom side of that hook. So that you have full hook gap on the top of that. So I just wanted to give kudos that's exactly what I would design one myself, is not close off any of that hook point on such a small hook to begin with. And the hookup ratio on these, I have really high hopes for because they are nice and wide open.
Yeah. Also, if there's anything that you're interested in picking up, we're going to actually have a discount code, which we normally don't do, but we're going to have a discount code below in the bio. And if you're going to purchase anything off the website, at least you can get a few bucks off that as well. I would like to mention the giveaway. So Lunkerhunt is providing $150 Canadian gift card to the Lunkerhunt website, which is pretty sick. So some of the baits that we showed you, even if you bought all of those, you'd still have a lot of money left over to buy other things. And believe me, the Lunkerhunt website, when you go into like soft plastics, there's like 10 pages you go through. There's tons of stuff. They make, again, me and Andrew have been using their stuff for years, like a long time, but they've got a lot of cool bass stuff coming
and
out.
a lot of new stuff, which I'm really excited to try.
They've got some new bass top waters and stuff. Yep.
The mice. Yeah. The Ferenzi mouse looks legit. We'll go into that when we're talking about bass, but I already have one. And I'm hoping to get a bunch more because it's probably going to be my favorite bait for topwater this coming year.
Yeah. So they've got tons of stuff. And if you're looking just to buy one or two things, definitely check out Canadian Tire as well. That's usually where I pick up the Lunkerhunt stuff, they've got a huge selection at your local Canadian Tire as well. So we'd like to thank Lunkerhunt for that. Again, all these baits, we're going to link below in the show notes. So if you want to check them out, see what they look like. If you're listening to this podcast, instead of watching the video version, which Jesse recommends because the audio version is way better because I edit it. But you'll be able to click on the link. It'll take you right to the bait so you can see what it looks like. And it may be something that you look at and you're like, wow, I need that. Sometimes that happens, right? You see a bait and you're like, that would work specifically for what I want to do with it. And I honestly think some of these baits like the bento minnow or the new Hive stuff that's super stretchy, like it's a good thing. And also you're going to save money too, because these baits aren't expensive, but you buy a pack of this and say it's a pattern or a bait that you use, like these micro wigglers, that pack's going to last you a long time because there's literally 10 of them in there and they stretch like 6 inches long. You're not going to like lose. This will probably last you years.
Yeah.
Lunkerhunt's like, no, buy more baits. So anyway, we'd like to thank them for that. $150 Canadian. Yeah. And the way that you're going to win that is Andrew's going to tell you right now.
So for all of our Patreon members, you can fill out forms and become a free Patreon member. But all of those who are already Patreon members, like a paid Patreon member, they are applicable for all of these giveaways. And what we are doing is we're going to have a on each of the giveaways, when we announce it on Patreon, just respond with, I want this, or I'm interested in this, because we have had recently in a fair amount of the giveaways, people that it's not something they're interested in, or especially if like for different prizes, they just weren't able to go, like ice fishing. You got to live around here in order to go use the ice fishing giveaway. So it was, we had a few where they just weren't able to claim their prizes, and we want to make sure that everyone gets, what they want. So just fill in, keep note on our Patreon. You'll see it come through when we're doing a giveaway, and just respond with, I want this. We'll make sure your name's in there and you're automatically entered at that point to win this awesome giveaway and also our future ones. Just a quick response is all it takes. We're going to move on to a little bit, this is like the lightning round, because we've covered some of these already, but essential gear for spring crappie fishing. And we're going to continue picking Bobby's brain. He's going to keep giving us that juice. It's good for a healthy fishing diet.
That's right. Your daily dose of juice.
For rods and reels, you're talking about like ultralight or light. But if you could say, like, what is your optimal combo for crappie fishing? If there's just one that you would, this is kind of your best thing for all around, what would you recommend?
Yeah. So the nice thing about going with a light over an ultralight is it is more versatile. The ultralight is kind of, you could use it for the moving baits too, but that tip is really light and you don't move the baits as well as I think you'd want. So if I could go with one rod, it be the rods that I'm running this year. A 7-foot one piece. Go with one piece because you want it to be sensitive. I know a lot of people like the 2 pieces for travel issues, but when you're dealing with panfish and real finessey light bites, having a one piece is really great. If you can't fit it in your car, maybe just get a shorter rod. But if you can, a 7-foot is nice because it's long enough that you can really kind of whip that little bait out there and get some more distance on it. Last year and years in the past, I was using some shorter rods, and I found that when I used the shorter ones or the longer ones, I'm always gravitating to the longer ones. They felt more comfortable to fish with. It was nicer once you hooked the fish, kind of fighting the fish with the longer rod. So I'm gonna stand by getting like a 7-footer as kind of the overall best length. 7-foot light one piece spinning rod, and then throw on like a 1,000 size reel. It's nice having the smaller size reel. You can even use a 500 size ice fishing reel if you want, because you're not really worrying about drag too much with this kind of fishing. It's nice too if you have a smaller reel and you want to run lighter line on that reel. That smaller reel is going to be able to take, it's going to hold that lighter line better than, say, if you were using a 2,500 larger.
You're not using blast. 2.5 spools of 5-pound.
Exactly.
you only get away with one.
Yeah, so I like the 1,000 size. It fits nice. It feels, still feels like you got a reel in your hand while you're casting. 500's a little small, but 1,000 size spinning reel. When it comes to line, if you are in a position to change the line, throw on something like, even Power Pro makes a 5 pound braid that I've used, and it's awesome. A very, very thin braid. You'd be amazed at how much farther you can cast, going from like the normal 10 pound braid when you're bass fishing down to a 5 pound. You get a lot more distance. And it does matter when you're using these little tiny, tiny light baits at times too. So, but anywhere from 5 to 10 pound on the braid will be fine. And then your leader, make sure it's lighter. You know, if you're running 10 pound braid, then maybe you're running a 5 or 6 pound fluorocarbon leader. If you're running 5 pound braid, that's super, super thin, then maybe you want to buy like a 4 pound fluoro, something that's very thin fluoro wise too. It's nice to have a little bit heavier braid than fluorocarbon. You want your fluoro to be lighter than your braid, essentially, especially when you're using the moving baits. I guess maybe it doesn't matter as much when you're talking about the float setup. You know, you just want light fluoro. You're not, you're working the float more than the bait.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're using those little jerk baits and stuff, that's when you'll really notice it too. And then yeah, down to your business end, whatever you're using, your jerk bait, your little tube head, float setup, whatever.
That's fantastic. For electronics, now we all know that our ideal setup would be, live scope. You can find them the easiest with that, I'm sure, and you can stay on them. So that's fantastic. But what would you say is kind of like mandatory? What are the electronics you can get away with that can still provide you success?
So if you have, again, the more you have, the better. But like even just down scan can help you. So for example, I fish Rice Lake a lot. A lot of the times that water is not clear enough for you to see down, especially if you get some wind. You can't see down a foot. So knowing that you're on weed growth is pretty important. So you can be on rice too. When they're up shallow in that 2-3 foot of water. Sometimes you can see them out there, but when they move off into that, say 5, 6, 7 foot weed, and you're, driving around on your boat, it's nice to see down scan that you have some weeds there. Maybe you hit a weed edge, and that's somewhere you want to set a waypoint, and then kind of just, follow that weed edge up shallower and see if the weeds go from 7 feet where the edge is all the way up to, the bank. Down imaging would be the first thing that I would kind of look at. But of course, when you have things like side scan, you can find the weed edges easier. When you have the live scope, if the fish are in the weeds, sometimes I'm not, like on Rice Lake, I don't really use the live scope for crappies. It's more just having to fish the area, knowing where the weeds are, and then fishing the areas to see where they're biting. But on the lakes, like Balsam and Sturgeon, places like that, where the areas they set up, they a lot of the times come out to that first drop that goes down to 12 feet, 13 feet, and they'll just suspend in a big kind of blob, then live scope is killer, because you can just stick the trolling motor on high, look around until you see the blob, and then fish the blob.
That's exactly how we found them. Because, like I said, we were fishing for walleye at the time, and we were scoping around trying to find walleye on top of the weeds and following these weed lines. And all of a sudden, like, Brian goes over and he's like, "Oh, look, there's the crappie," and there's just like a bunch of blobs all together, like sitting above some weeds. And I'm like, "How can you tell?" He's like, "Well, just look, like there's a bunch of blobs. That's crappie." So it was cool to see it, and that's what kind of kicked us off casting for him. But it was cool.
He lives on some crazy fisheries. Like, I haven't gone up there yet to fish with him, but I've seen some of his posts when he's crappie fishing, and he'll be out, over 50 feet of water, and the blob's there like 3 feet down, and and it's awesome. I
he's
have
a hammer.
Been on a,
he's good. If you get a chance to fish them, absolutely do it.
I'm pretty sure he told us one time that he was catching them on top water, like in like 50 feet of water. They were like right under the surface. He's like chucking little top waters. Yeah, he's a cool guy. Not as cool as Bobby, of course, but pretty good.
I'm gonna give Bobby a chance to obviously, shout himself out for, all of his stuff out of book, but we're gonna get to that in just a second. one last, or do you have any other accessories that you would recommend that are beneficial for crappie fishing? Like I know me, I really like having little forceps because if
Sure.
those little hooks, they can go deep down the mouth.
Yeah.
Those are fantastic. Anything else that you can think of that, is kind of for you a must have on the boat when you are going for crappie?
Well, I it's going to sound like I stole your idea here because I was talking to you guys beforehand, but polarized sunglasses are super important. I remember we were talking about that prior to the show here.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of times where, like I said last year, the way I found them was I was trolling motor lawn and I saw them swimming around. And if you're going to sight fish them when they're in shallow, you need the polarized glasses because they blend in. They are super camouflage. So yeah, get yourself a good pair of polarized glasses. And if you can find one that's got different lenses, that's big too. Because I found these ones on Amazon a couple weeks ago. They're not brand name, but they're polarized. They're good polarized glasses. You get 3 different lens colors and 3 pairs for $30. The frames are crap, but I mean,
You
the
lose them
the
half the time
lenses,
anyways. So,
yeah. So I got, you can get 3 different lenses. Get like a smoke lens,
mm-hmm.
a normal smoke lens, then get an amber lens for when it's overcast because that helps big time. And then like a blue lens is good for when it's like super sunny and you get different kinds of glares on the water, or you're fishing super clear water. Like I do some fishing on the Great Lakes, so the blue lens is good for that. But yeah, get yourself a good pair of polarized. They're not super expensive nowadays if you find the right ones, and that'll help you a ton with crappie fishing because it's very visual. Like a lot of the times you're looking at them. So
Is there anything that you would say people often make mistakes with in crappie fishing? What is, if you could offer advice to avoid this, one issue, what would it be?
I was thinking about this because I thought you guys might ask this one. And the one thing that I see when I'm guiding a lot of people that are new to crappie fishing, specifically when we're fishing like a float setup, is they'll cast out. A lot of the times they just leave it there. And you do have to work the bait, like a big crappie, especially a big crappie, is not a stupid fish. They're just as smart as big bass would be. So I have found that when you try to actually work your bait, have your rod tip in the air and be small twitching, just imagine your bait down there and just imagine what you want your bait to be looking like. So say you have a little minnow profile on, you want to really work that bait like it's a minnow. I have to remind my guests sometimes because I'll see them cast out and just kind of be sitting there watching the bobber. And I mean, yeah, maybe, you'll have a fish that'll come up and hit it, or if they're really on, maybe it doesn't matter, right? But to increase your chances, work the bait. And, that's again, when it comes down to having a a nice light rod to be able to work that bait without overworking it.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it comes down to having some good equipment for that. But yeah, it's not that's the biggest thing with when I take people out is I think when they see the bobber, they kind of think back to, just casting off the dock for sunfish and leaving the bobber there, right? But when you're dealing with these crappies, think of them as like the apex panfish, and especially when you're on big ones, they can be smart. So throw it out there and every cast, work your bait like it's in front of a 16 incher, and you'll catch a lot more fish doing it.
Awesome.
That's where I'm going to use this Lunkerhunt bento minnow because it looks legit real.
Twitch that tail.
They're like, I'm the apex predator. I'm like, well, time to go in my frying pan. I'm just kidding.
So Jesse he's curated a list of questions from our listeners, from Patreon, from Instagram. So we're going to pass it on to Jesse to start asking Bobby some questions. We try and keep when Jesse and I answer stuff like this in the Q&As, we do our best to keep it 30 seconds or less. We often fail, so don't feel bad, but as soon as you're over 30 seconds, I'm going to start like tapping the microphone annoyingly. So make sure you keep in that though. Okay, Bobby?
Sure. Sounds good.
All right. So I'm just keeping the ones that we haven't discussed yet because there's a lot of our information that you've already talked about. So we're not going to talk about those again.
And as usual, there's a lot of weird ones.
Did you get a lot, eh?
Yeah, decent amount, but a lot of them were very similar. So we covered them already. So if I didn't read your question, sorry, but we're not going to repeat.
It was already answered. Listen to the whole episode, people.
Here's a good question from Say Doggy Fishing. He says, should crappie have tighter harvest limits and a closed season in all fishing management zones?
Yes, 100%. You know what? I've seen too many times when I'm out on the water in the Kawarthas. I think limits across the board are too high, to be honest, with everything. But crappies, because they're a good tasting fish, um, I've seen people keep their limit and like it's like 30 or something per person. And if they have a boat of 4 people, like they're just throwing everything in there. And like, you know what? I mean, when it comes to a Great Lake and you can, pound perch like that, you don't really have to worry as much because the population is just so huge. Maybe, but like these crappie populations are not as big, especially if you're dealing with some of the smaller lakes. And now, of course, keep a few. I let all my guests who want to take home crappies keep a few. But I discuss this with them and we decide to take home a reasonable amount, How many are you going to actually eat? How many do you need to feed you and your family? I mean, there's lots of times you can go and fill the freezer at different points in time. But yeah, I think they're too high. I think it should go down.
I agree. Here's a question from Matt Martin at Smooth River Guiding. He's someone that we just had on the podcast a few weeks ago.
See, he's going to know if you're blowing smoke or not in this answer. So,
yeah. He says, how does watercolor impact lure color selection? I know we kind of covered that, but.
Yeah, no, it's big because, I mean, I fish on 2 types of bodies of water. I fish on some of those weedier, shallower lakes like Rice and Scugog and stuff. And Rice in particular, like Rice is dirty. Like sometimes it's chocolate milk dirty. And my best color on Rice Lake is chartreuse. It's usually the only thing I have on is chartreuse or that electric chicken, which is like half chartreuse. But then when I go to my clear lakes, even sturgeon's got some relatively clear water. That's when my green pumpkin shines. I think it's across the board. Now, it's funny because I don't feel the same way about bass. Like bass on Rice Lake, I'm using green pumpkin as well. But with crappies, because they're a real visual feeder, they're one of those species that likes those brighter colors. So when you have the dirtier water and you can use those brighter colors, yeah, that's when I like using it. Kind of like pike, right? Like pike are visual feeders. So sometimes when you get that stained water, something chartreuse works awesome for pike. I've been in that situation a lot, or bright orange does well for pike too at times. And I think it's the same with crappies. But that's when I bring out that chartreuse is stained water or the electric chicken. And then clear water, like I said, 99% of the time it's green pumpkin.
Words to live by. Wes from Wham Baits is like, no. So I'm always like, just make green pumpkin. You'll be fine. He's like, no. I have to have 8,000 colors. All right, here's a question from some guy named Andrew. Andrew asks his own questions on his own podcast. I'm just reading this because it's actually a good question. Normally I delete his, but anyway. He asks, if you catch a crappie that is larger than your average frying pan, is it still considered a panfish?
Ooh, I mean, of course.
Just get a bigger frying pan, you fool.
That's right.
I was going to say, I've seen some pretty big frying pans. Here's a good question from I Catch Stinks. He says, where do crappie run to after the spawn?
So again, if we're talking about the 2 different kinds of lakes, when you're dealing with those shallower St. Lawrence lowland, weedier lakes, they push out to usually the deepest weed edge they can find. And, they'll stay there for a long time. Like I catch crappies on walleye baits a lot of the time. As you're getting into that, like, late May, June, when I'm out fishing for walleyes, in deep water, deep weed edges, you'll pull up crappies here and there. And that's because that's where they kind of push out and kind of sulk around post spawn and after post spawn. But when you're dealing with those lakes that have the deep water, and this is why I call them ghosts, is they disappear. Like they move a lot. You can have crappies suspending 8 feet down in 50 feet of water. You can have them right on the bottom in 25 feet of water. They go all over the place. There's a sunken truck on Rice Lake that a lot of people know about. It's kind of almost a community hole at this point. I've seen the school of crappies go there at times, which is weird because it destroys my comment with the different kinds of lakes, because the truck is nowhere near a weed line. But the crappies will go and suspend over it. Like, they're ghosts. They move around big time. And that's why at 2B Fishing Guiding Service, we don't guide for them after the spawn.
It just occurred to me that perhaps the only thing keeping crappie alive is the fact that after they're done being in the shallows, that they're impossible to find.
Yeah, you got.
Because if they were easy to find and you just clean them out of the lake, like not you yourself.
If you could fish, year long, people would be doing it.
So like, there's a small part of time where they're stacked in the shallows, and then after that, they're just like, "Phew, you'll never find me."
Do they loosen up their school too? Like, when it warms up and they're no longer spawning, do they spread out more too? Like,
I think,
or do they stay schooled?
Like Rice Lake, they'll be in that big school when they're up spawning, and then when they disperse, the schools aren't very big. The schools are maybe 10, 12 crappies. That's a big school. You know, okay. I've caught big loners at times too on Rice Lake. But on a place like, you know, that has the deeper water, like the places that Brian fishes up north and stuff, I imagine they would just stay together and pod around wherever. They do that on some of the smaller lakes that I fish too. I don't find them because they're gone, but they stay together. I don't find random ones. But on Rice Lake and, you know, sturgeon, I've seen it. Pigeon, I've seen it. You caught one under a dock on pigeon. Yeah. Like, they just kind of, you know.
I killed one under a dock.
Yeah, you did.
I still feel bad about that. Because, you know, like, if you're listening to this and you've never caught a crappie, they have paper thin mouths.
They're called paper mouths.
They're called paper mouths. Like, their mouths are literally super thin. And when I literally jacked that fish with a flipping stick, I literally destroyed its mouth. Like, I harvested it. It was delicious, but I destroyed it. I felt so bad.
Yeah.
I just crack on this fish with like this like half-ounce tungsten just right through his mouth. I was like, oh man. I was like, should I release it? Nah. Anyway, it was tasty. All right. That's all the questions that we have. Most of the other ones, if you did add a question, a lot of them were already covered by Bobby. So we again thank Bobby for all the tips. I thought we'd add one secret segment that I didn't tell Andrew about, because last time we had Bobby on, we actually asked AI to give us some slogans for his guiding service. And remember the one who was like, Bobby Belmonte, getting fish to regret their life decisions since 2022, something like that. So I thought I would ask AI some humorous crappie fishing guided service slogans. So I'm going to read these to you. There's 8 of them. Tell me which one that you like the best. Dropping slabs like a bad burrito. Fish with Bobby. Also, they're all poop related. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, reeling in slabs quicker than Taco Tuesday regret. No? Okay. Some of these are terrible. I can't read them. Dropping a load of slabs. Book a trip today.
Yep.
That's perfect.
Okay, number 4, flushing out big crappie, one cast at a time.
I like that one, actually.
This one would be if Andrew and Bobby fish together, because Andrew's a plumber. More slabs, less clogs. Fish with Bobby. Number 6, cast, reel, wipe, and repeat. That's how we do crappie fishing. And you're just wiping fish slime off your hands, people. That's it. All right, number 7. The only time it's okay to say, man, that was a crappie day. Classic dad joke.
Classic, yeah.
And then the last one, if your fishing trip ain't crappie, you're doing it wrong. Fish with Bobby Belmonte. I'm going to make a t-shirt with one of these and make Bobby wear it at the next trade show. All right. So I thought we would take this opportunity to read 2 reviews that we got. We normally would read reviews. I don't think we've done any reviews this year that we've read so far. But we would like to thank everyone for all their reviews. We're actually over 555 star reviews on podcasts. So that's absolutely fantastic. Actually, every single podcast so far that has come out this year has been in the top 10, some of them in the top 5. So that's fantastic. We'd like to thank everyone for their ongoing support. Please do us a favor, write us a review, give us a review on Apple or a rating on Spotify, something like that. We appreciate it. It helps us rank better, and it helps us get better guests like Bobby and like, you know, all the other random ones that we've got this year. But I thought we'd read some of the reviews because we never do. And I always say we will and we don't. So my bad. So here's a good review. It says 5 stars. Oh, always the 5-star ones. I'm not reading the 1-star ones because there isn't any. Haha. What a great fishing podcast. Great host with great topics and information about fishing multi-species in Ontario. You guys are passionate and care and it shows. Keep up the great work. And then a beer emoji. That one's for Andrew. Here's another one from G-Man. He says, I stumbled on AOA a few weeks ago and now find myself catching up on all their previous episodes. I really enjoy the fact that they don't take themselves too seriously and at the same time share knowledge that is transferable to most parts of North America. And this review's from the United States. We have a lot of viewers from the United States as well. One review that we got, and it says, second Sunday of the year, and I just realized there wasn't a new Average Ontario Anglers episode. So if you haven't listened to last year, the last episode of the year, we kind of talked about how we went down to 2 a month because it's a lot better for making content for us. We can have better quality episodes and have really good guests on. So if you're just catching up from last year, we were every weekend last year. This year, it's the first and third Sunday of the month, just so everyone knows. And I'll read one more. This one says, Best Fishing Podcast. Such a fun show to listen to. Informative, funny, and it doesn't matter if you're a beginner or been fishing your whole life because there's something for everyone to take from this. Also, very nice to have something local. Keep up the great work, fellas. Your hard work doesn't go unnoticed. So again, we'd like to thank everyone for writing a review. If you do have a review that you write, especially if you make it kind of funny, not that those ones are funny, but if you make it kind of funny, we'll definitely read it on there. And we appreciate it.
There's actually one other review. Jesse had sent this to me a while ago, and I said, I want to read this in the podcast. And I keep forgetting to do it. So now,
okay, do it.
This is from Gabriel. This is actually just a message he sent us. Hello, Jesse and Andrew. I know a lot of people probably say this, but me and my brother listen to your podcast every day. We are 11 and 12, and we love fishing and your podcast, and we have both caught fish because of something we learned while listening. Goodbye. Sincerely, Gabriel. That was awesome to hear, because again, we liked having a family-friendly podcast here, so the fact that the young kids are getting to listen to it and they're catching good fish, that was an awesome review to get as well from them. So I just wanted to give them a big shout out on the episode.
Awesome. And okay, now that we're going into the screenshots, I did save this last one. I know Bobby's like bored right now because we're not reviewing him, but
we're giving Bobby time to think of the quote of the week.
Yes, it's true.
God.
I'll give you a little heads up there. You're welcome.
Oh, I know it's coming.
This is the last one I'll read. This one, someone sent us a message on Instagram. So we really appreciate if you do send us a message on Instagram or a comment on YouTube. It makes us feel happy, right, Andrew?
Yeah. Or if you see us at the grocery store, come up, say hi, buy my groceries. That's all appreciated.
So got this message from Manny. He says, yo guys, hope all is well. Was listening to a few episodes the other night at work, and I just wanted to come here and say I love what you guys have been doing. I've been fishing since I was about 15 or so. Thanks to my brother. I'm 32 now, and the last few years I've not gone out as much due to limited time. And when I have free time, I'd rather just chill. I hear that. But listening to the podcast, it gave me the itch to get out again. So thanks. I just want to say I love how informative you guys are. Your episodes, they teach a lot in the episodes, even just safety tips. It all goes such a long way. So I have got a lot of comments like that of people that they grew up fishing with their dad or their mom or their grandparents, and they kind of got out of it. And then we kind of, maybe influence them to start spending more money on fishing stuff. So we do apologize for that. I'm sorry, but I will never regret getting anyone into the sport of fishing. It is the best sport in the world. It gets you outside. It's great for your mental health. And, if you catch crappie too, it's so satisfying.
It is. It's funny that they have that name crappie, yet there's such a nice fish,
I used to have a shirt from Bass Pro Shops years ago, and it was crappie, and it had all these little things saying what each part of the fish was, and on the back of the shirt it says it's pronounced crappie. I'm like, nah, it's crappie.
Yeah. Last time I noticed the letter A makes an A noise. Just like how Americans say, like the car company Mazda. In Canada, it's pronounced Mazda. Everyone pronounces it Mazda, but in the States, everyone calls it Mazda, right? Same with crappie and crappie. And I've had people call me out and be like, it's not pronounced Mazda, it's pronounced Mazda. It's like, it literally isn't. The Canadian commercials call it Mazda.
Or pickerel and walleye. Fight me! So that's the end of our episode. Before we go, we do have... Let's get into that. So we're getting to the end of the episode. But we have the... first of all, Bobby, how do people get a hold of you if they want to have a guided trip? You shared a lot of good tips and tricks for one species we were talking about today. And it wasn't all of your tips and tricks for it. I know that. I'm looking forward to fishing with you in the spring. We're going for crappie actually when you're hearing this episode, it'll be going in just a few weeks' time. And I'm pumped to learn even more when I'm on his boat. So how can people also have the joy of doing so?
Yeah, so you can check out my website, tobefishing.ca. That's where all my booking information is and stuff. But I'm super active on all social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. And I'm starting a new YouTube channel this year with vlog style. So behind the scenes footage and everything, because we all know everybody wants to see that, right? Anyway, I think it's gonna be fun. I'm gonna do it with my buddy Griff and pump out some content. But anyways, 2B_fishing. That's my Instagram, TikTok, and on YouTube it will be 2B Fishing Guiding Service. And yeah, just shoot me a message. We can set up a trip. And I do a lot more than crappies, like pike, walleyes, bass, muskie, anything in the Kawartha Lakes. So hit me up.
And from experience, I'll tell you, I fished with Bobby for muskie. It was an absolutely awesome day. So I'm looking forward to going crappie fishing with you. But all of those things you don't have to remember, because I'm going to link them all below in the show notes. So you won't have to remember and type it out. Just click on the link. It'll take you right to Bobby's Instagram and his website and all that stuff. So you can check out his stuff.
Awesome. I'm going to be watching his videos and like background scenes, be like pausing it, looking at his boat deck, be like enhance, zoom, enhance. Be like, oh, I see exactly what bait he's using.
You know what? I'm not going to keep any secrets with it. Like I'm not going to blow out my water. Like I'm gonna, if I have something that a clip where it's like completely obvious where I am, I'm probably not gonna put it in a video. But you guys are gonna see everything on there. I'm gonna go through the exact setups that I use, the exact mindset on the water. I'm gonna post days that aren't ideal either, days that I don't crack them, and show you guys what it's really like. So
it's just him crying in his boat. He's like, this is what it's like.
Either way, he can come back home and say, that was a crappy day of fishing.
That's right. Wipe and repeat.
That's the quote of me. That's awesome.
That's the only one that stuck with me. So after you said that, I was like, that's, yeah. Go
on. Another big shout out to Lunkerhunt, the sponsor of the episode. Be sure to enter in if you're interested in winning the giveaway. It's $150 on the website. That is a bunch
Canadian.
of gear. Yeah, 150 Canadian. Don't at me. but if you have the opportunity, again, go on Patreon, mention I want this. Give us a message. We'll make sure that you're in the big wheel of names when we draw that later on. And as well, if you're ordering off the website, you can also have access to the promo code Jesse will have posted down below. Again, you'll save a bit of discount on that as well. Even if you don't win, still get stuff. So that's fantastic. To finish off the episode, we have, as tradition states, the quote of the week. And to handle that is Bobby.
Well, boys, as a wise man named Ned Stark once said, spring is coming.